The lamp cut a narrow cone through black water. Nothing but silt and the slow drift of the current. Then the beam slid across something that should not have been there. A face. Stone. Larger than the diver who hung above it in the dark. A carved cheek. A brow. The curve of a god's mouth. All of it lying flat on the floor of the bay, as if it had been waiting. The diver hovered there in the gloom off the Egyptian coast, breathing slow, looking down at a giant who had been swallowed by the Mediterranean. Around that broken head lay walls, columns, the shape of streets under a blanket of sand. This was not a single ruin. This was a city, an entire city resting under the waves of Abu Qir Bay. And for centuries, the smartest people alive had insisted this place was a story, a myth, a name in old books and nothing more. They were wrong. It was real. It was just underwater. And almost no living person had ever seen it. Welcome back to the channel, where we go down into the ground and into the water to find the things history tried to keep. I am the voice you will be hearing for the next stretch of this story, and I want to make you 3 promises before we go under. First, I will show you a city that ruled Egypt's coast before Alexandria ever existed. Second, I will show you exactly how the ground itself murdered that city and dragged it into the sea. And third, I will hand you the catalog of what divers actually pulled from that seabed, the statues and the gold and the temple, so you can decide for yourself how a place this enormous stayed hidden for so long. Stay with me. The bottom of that bay holds more than you think. Long before the discovery, there was only the name, Thonis, to the Egyptians who built it, Heraclean, to the Greek sailors who traded there, 2 names for the same place, written down by ancient authors who described a great port at the mouth of the Nile. The historian, Herodotus, mentioned it. He told a story of Helen of Troy and her lover passing through this very harbor on their way through Egypt. Other writers spoke of a temple, a customs house, a city where every ship entering Egypt from the Greek world had to stop and pay. For generations, scholars read those passages and frowned. There was no city, no ruins on the coast, no walls, no rubble, no proof. Some argued that Thonis and Heraclean were 2 separate towns that writers had confused. Others suspected the whole place was half legend, a name inflated by old storytellers. Picture the contrast. On one side, ancient texts describing a wealthy port crowded with merchants and priests. On the other side, an empty stretch of Egyptian shoreline with nothing to show for it. The mismatch sat there for almost 2,000 years. A famous port with no address. A city that left a name in the records and left nothing on the map. Now imagine the place when it was alive. Thonis Heraclean sat at the western mouth of the Nile, threaded with canals like a smaller, older Venice of the Delta. Wooden bridges crossed the waterways. Harbors held merchant ships from across the Mediterranean. At the heart of it stood the great temple of the god Amun, called Amun-Gereb, a sacred site so important that pharaohs traveled here to receive their right to rule. This was where a new king became a universal king in the eyes of the supreme Egyptian god. The temple treasury held silver ritual tools, gold jewelry, and delicate alabaster jars made to hold perfumes and sacred ointments. Wealth flowed through this city because every ship had to. Before Alexandria was founded in the year 331 before the Common Era, Thonis Heraclean was the front door to Egypt. If you sailed in from the Greek world, you stopped here. You paid your customs tax here. Your goods were weighed and recorded here, and a stone monument by the harbor spelled out the taxes owed to the Egyptian crown. Greek traders settled nearby. Greek mercenaries left their weapons in the soil. There was even a sanctuary to the goddess Aphrodite, tucked east of the great temple, full of bronze and ceramic offerings. Festivals filled the canals with light. The mysteries of the god Osiris were celebrated here, with sacred boats carried in procession across the water. For hundreds of years, this was one of the richest, busiest, holiest places on the Egyptian coast. A city that controlled the sea trade of an entire kingdom, and then the ground it stood on began to turn against it. Here is the part that should make you uneasy. The city did not burn. It was not sacked by an enemy army. It was killed by the dirt under its own feet. Thonis Heraclean was built on the Nile Delta, and the delta is not solid rock. It is clay and silt and waterlogged sediment. The loose soil a great river drops as it meets the sea. That kind of ground has a terrible secret. Under the right shock, it stops behaving like solid earth and starts behaving like liquid. Geologists call it liquefaction. When a strong earthquake hits saturated delta soil, the grains lose their grip on each other, and the whole surface turns to something closer to wet sludge. Anything heavy sitting on top, a temple, a colossal statue, a stone harbor wall, simply sinks, and the eastern Mediterranean shook often. Earthquakes struck the region across the centuries, and some were followed by tidal waves rolling in off the sea. Each tremor loosened the ground a little more. Each surge of water ate at the foundations. At the same time, the sea itself was slowly rising, and the land was slowly settling, so the coastline crept inward year after year. Picture a city sinking not in a single dramatic night, but a few inches at a time across generations. A flooded street here, a collapsed temple wall there, the great statue of Happy tipping and going down into the muck. The drowning of Thonis Heraclean was not one disaster. It was a slow betrayal by the very land that gave the city its wealth. So the people left. We do not have a final scene, no last witness writing down the end. What we have is a fade. As the harbors silted up and the floors went under, the trade moved elsewhere, much of it to the rising new metropolis of Alexandria just down the coast. The temples slipped below the waterline. The canals filled. Century by century, the bay reclaimed the streets, until by around the 8th century of the Common Era, the city was simply gone. Not ruined on land where someone could walk through it. Gone. Swallowed whole. And here's what time does to a thing it has buried. It erases the memory along with the place. People stopped pointing at the spot and saying a city used to be there, because there was nothing left to point at. Within a few generations, the location itself was lost. All that survived was the name in the old books, Thonis Heraclean, the port of the historians. Scholars kept reading those passages and arguing about whether the place had ever been one real city at all. The Mediterranean kept its secret well. Sand drifted over the broken statues. Sediment packed itself into the temple of Amun. 1,200 years of darkness settled over everything, and the bay above gave no hint of what it was hiding. To anyone standing on that shoreline, it was just water. Empty, ordinary water. But the sea was hiding all of it. Every wall, every god, every coin. In the year 2000, a French underwater archaeologist named Frank Gaudio decided to stop reading about the lost port and start looking for it. He led a team from the European Institute for Underwater Archaeology, and they did something the old scholars never could. They surveyed the seabed itself. They used sensitive instruments to map the magnetic signature of the bay floor, hunting for the shapes and densities that did not belong, the buried stone and metal of a vanished town. And out in Abukir Bay, under layers of sand and silt, the instruments started lighting up. Then the divers went down. Imagine being one of them. You drop into murky green water with almost no visibility. You reach the bottom, and your hand closes on carved stone, a wall, a column, a face. The diver who first saw that giant head was looking at a city no human eye had seen in more than 1,000 years. Gaudio had not found a scrap. He had not found a single statue or a stray anchor. He had found the whole thing. The port the historians described, the temple they doubted, the customs city of Thonis and Heraclean, all of it, spread across the floor of the bay exactly where the ancient texts hinted it should be. The myth had an address after all. Now let me give you the catalog, because the scale is what makes this hard to believe. Divers found a colossal statue of the Nile god Hapi standing more than 5 meters tall, around 17 feet of carved stone, a giant meant to embody the flood that fed Egypt. They found enormous figures of pharaohs and queens, including a red granite king over 5 meters high, weighing more than 5 tons. broken into pieces on the seabed. They found the great temple of Amun-Gareb itself, the sacred heart of the city, with its treasury of silver instruments and gold jewelry, and alabaster perfume jars still down there in the dark. They counted the remains of more than 60 ships scattered across the harbor floor, alongside roughly 700 ancient anchors, an entire drowned fleet. They recovered gold coins and jewelry, the wealth of a trading port frozen where it fell. And they found the inscribed stone monuments, including a tall stela almost 2 meters high, carrying a royal decree, the same kind of tax law the historians had described, with the city's own name carved into it. That stela settled the argument forever. The stone literally says, Thonis Heraclean. The texts were not exaggerating. The place was real, it was named, and the proof had been lying on the seabed the entire time. Even now the digging continues. As recently as the last few years, the team has pulled silver ritual instruments and gold jewelry from the temple treasury and uncovered a Greek sanctuary to Aphrodite and the weapons of Greek mercenaries nearby. Every season, the bay gives up a little more. If you find drowned history as staggering as I do, take 1 second to subscribe so the next discovery finds its way to you. So, step back and look at what this actually means. For nearly 2,000 years, educated people treated Thonis Heraclean as a doubtful story, a name that probably grew taller in the retelling. They were not stupid. They simply could not see what was right offshore. The city was never a myth. It was never an exaggeration. It was a real port full of real priests and merchants and pharaohs. And the only reason it vanished from history is that it vanished underwater, into the one place no one thought to look. That should change how you hear the word lost. When we say a city was lost, we usually picture rubble swallowed by jungle or sand. We rarely picture it intact under the sea, complete with its gods and its gold, waiting. And if a place this large, this wealthy, this important, could sit undetected on the floor of a busy bay until the year 2000, the obvious question is, how many more are down there? The Mediterranean is shallow at its edges and crowded with old coastlines that have slipped beneath the waves. Harbors, temples, whole towns built on sinking ground. Most of the human story did not happen on the seabed, but a stunning amount of it ended up there. We have barely begun to map it, and then there is the face. Go back to that first beam of light in the dark water and think about what it landed on. A god, carved in stone, lying on the floor of the bay. That statue of Hapi, or one of the great pharaohs beside it, stood upright in the city when the festivals lit the canals and the ships came in to pay their tax. It watched the priests and the merchants. It was standing there when the first earthquake loosened the soil. It was standing when the water reached the temple steps. And then, at some point in the slow drowning, it went down too, tipping into the dark, its carved eyes still open. For 1,200 years, that face stared up through the murk, at a surface no one would ever break for it. No light reached the bottom, no voice, just sand settling, season after season, century after century. And then one day a diver's lamp swung across the seabed, and after all that time in the cold and the silence, something finally found it. So here is the thesis I will leave you with. We treat the ancient world as something we have mostly excavated, mostly explained, mostly seen. Thonis Heraclean says we are wrong, and that the biggest discoveries are not waiting in the desert. They are waiting under the water, where almost no one is looking. That is my honest read. Yours might be different, and I genuinely want to hear it. So tell me in the comments. If a whole legendary city was sitting on the floor of one bay this entire time, what do you think is still down there in all the other drowned harbors of the world? And which one do you wish they would find next? Drop your answer below, because that argument is half the reason this channel exists. If you made it this far, you already think like the people who find these places, so subscribe and come down into the dark with us again next time. There is always more under the surface.